Okay, Van, stay with. I'm also joined by Obada Hitto, who is a political analyst based in Istanbul. Obada, thank you for being on the program. We're trying to figure out what Donald Trump's foreign policy is, if at all. I mean, there are lots of people who say it's completely chaotic. There are others who say there's a method to this madness. Some say that he is wedded to some of the traditional determinants of foreign policy. Others say that there is a lot of tension between him and the traditional security establishment. What is your take on this?
If we want to understand Donald Trump's foreign policy, I think we're going to have to go back to the legacy that he inherited from President Obama. President Trump didn't really come into his presidency with many policy kind of agendas or different kinds of protocols that he was going to follow, other than that he wanted to pull out of the Middle East and other kinds of generic and general assumptions about how he was going to pursue his foreign policy. The decisions that he's been making, I think, have been mired by the investigations into his relationship and people around him, their relationships with Russia. And so I think that has made it difficult for Trump to actually put together, and his administration to put together, a coherent foreign policy. That being said, he has made some attempts to take very drastic measures in regards to the foreign policy. Now we can see that Trump is making more drastic decisions and kind of irrational decisions, if you will, based on the sentiments of his advisors and the military people who are around him. We saw that Mattis, the Secretary of Defense, resigned from his position soon after Trump's decision to announced decision to pull troops out of Syria. So obviously he's taking matters into his own hands and may not be actually taking the advice of his advisors or closest advisors, assumedly, such as his Secretary of Defense, into consideration. So it wouldn't help us much at this point to really try and evaluate what is possible now, but we can definitely see that he came into the presidency without a clear plan and continues to have any plan at all.
Okay, so if he doesn't have a plan, if he is playing from one morning to another, taking to Twitter and tweeting about this, that, and the other, then what exactly are we looking at? So he withdraws from Syria. Russia and Iran are already very strong presence in Syria. The national security strategy document says China and Russia are going to be the big rivals. Then he also meets with Putin and says essentially that my intelligence people fed me all the wrong information because Russia didn't do anything as far as the US elections were concerned. But on the other hand, he wants to get out of the INF, and the nuclear posture review says that he wants to get 2 new missiles for the submarines. So all of this doesn't really fit into some kind of pattern. I mean, these are not small pieces that one can build a large mosaic with, which actually makes some sense.
Exactly. This is kind of an erratic approach to his foreign policy. It almost seems like he has schizophrenia when it comes to his policy priorities and his policy decisions. The relationship with Russia is probably the most problematic because it seems through the investigations that are happening that there has been some sort of collusion with Russian officials. There have been communications with Russian officials who express their interest to influence American voters and to actually pay money to try and change the course of the elections. So the situation is very complicated for Trump, and his ability to get out of that situation is based on his business repertoire. He's a businessman in the end of the day. He is not approaching his politics in the way that a statesman would or a seasoned diplomat would. Instead, he's approaching it as a businessman. I think this is where much of his erratic behavior is manifesting from.
Okay. Van, do you agree with Obada Hitto that this is essentially the approach of a business person?
Look, it could be an approach of a business person. I would agree on that with the previous speaker. But I totally disagree on the issue that there is no plan at all. Look, again, I remind you, presidents come to power, presidents get elected based on an agenda. Presidents have certain agendas, they propose, they have campaign promises, they have their policy aims, their goals, but they don't have anything clear, and they don't have anything that would say we have to start from this and go to this point and the next. So presidents make their campaign promises, and then once they are elected to office, a lot of times they are shaped by the global events, some major events that could happen, that could affect their countries and their administrations. What President Trump, the American president, proposed, he proposed that Syria's neighbors, the neighbors in the Middle East, the big countries who have a lot of money, they have the capital necessary to help rebuild Syria. They have the capital necessary to ensure that there is peace in their vicinity. These countries need to play their role. He called for this during the campaign, and he's basically carrying it out by withdrawing from Syria and letting other neighbors of Syria take the helm and make sure that there is peace in Syria. Now, how will that plan out? We have to wait and see. We should judge that on the merits and on the results of the policy. On the issue of NATO, he did the same thing. He asked for traditional U.S. allies to pitch more money for their defense, and Europeans today have been trying to work harder, and for the first time in decades, say that they also are taking care of their militaries. They also want to modernize and someday perhaps make a more European level defense system that would help the Americans in NATO. So
okay, Van, since you talked about NATO, Van, since you talked about NATO and you also said that you do not agree that there is no plan, tell me, NATO expansion has been a big thing with Moscow. Russia has been extremely unhappy with NATO expansion and also the Partnership for Peace program. Now, the National Security Strategy document looks at Russia as a threat. But on the other hand, if Donald Trump wants to improve relations, and if he wants to go in the opposite direction from the traditional security establishment, then he should probably be doing something about folding NATO back. But that is not happening. So where is the plan? What is the direction?
Well, the plan, first of all, would be not to haphazardly, on a full speed mode, expand NATO at this point. When you need Russia's assistance, when you need Russia's help in ending the war in Syria, then you better at least keep things on the confrontation between NATO and Russia where they are, and not make the situation worse. This would be a strategy the administration might follow, that we would keep things as they are. We would put a halt on new memberships to NATO. We would not encourage more countries to join NATO at this point. But at the same time, we would commit to what we had already committed in NATO to keep our defense budget and ask other countries to pitch in. This would be a way of trying to talk to Russia.
Okay. Thank you, Van Megerdet for talking to us. Obada Hetu, I have to wrap up the program. So you really think there is a plan, as Van was saying? Because I can't see one.
Unfortunately, I don't think I agree completely with the other guest, with Van. The issue here is that Trump is being forced into a corner. As the guest mentioned, that he was brought to office by different kinds of interest groups and through funding and campaigning. And those people who put him in office have expectations. And now that he's in this corner, he is having to appease and appeal to different kinds of parties and different kinds of interests at the same time. And that's where these conflicting policies are coming in, and why he doesn't make sense when he says that, that in his national security strategy says that Russia is an enemy, but then it's found that Russia was actually helping him to get into office. So there's an inherent disconnect in the way that he came into office and in the American political establishment. And I think this is where the source of these incoherent policies are coming from.
Okay. Thank you so much, Obada Hetu, for giving us your perspective on this. This is all for today. We shall see you tomorrow. Until then, it's goodbye.